Thank you very much, Ezra, for your introduction, and thank you for your speech as well, which in a few words you put together, you explain clearly the cornerstone of our rights. The cornerstone of our rights is embedded in the biblical narrative. There is no doubt about it, for 3,500 years or so. And one of the reasons that it is so striking is that you have in, for instance, Bamidbar, which is the book of Numbers in the Torah, in chapter 34 of Numbers, you will see exactly the precise delineation of the borders of Israel with the same accuracy that as any resolution of the United Nations, which is it's amazing, really. And so the cornerstone is in the biblical narrative, and we are finding month after month after month gradual confirmations of this narrative in archaeological digs in Israel. And not only the Jews believe in this narrative, but the conservative Christians have always believed in it. And one of these special conservative Christians in the 1800s was Eugene Blackstone, who was instrumental in launching modern Zionism. Having said that, we cannot deny that there is often some friction between the religious and the non-religious. And this is not only true for the Jews, it's only true for everybody. The religious Jews, they have subdivided into different congregations, from the ultra-Orthodox to the Reconstructionists. And on top of that, you have the Sephardim and the Ashkenaz, and you have the people from the left and the right, the liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats. So it's a real mosaic of a cacophony sometimes. And so we have to find something that unites us, because this is the thing. At the point now, particularly when we are coming through a dangerous period, not only for Israel, but for the Middle East, for the region, and for the world, we have to find something that unites us absolutely with the basis on the ancestral religious narrative, but we have to find some rallying cry that unites everybody from every faction. And this rallying cry, I think, is the concept of the Jewish people. And it's not obvious to talk about the Jewish people, because when you think of Islam and the Muslims, for instance, or the Christian, there is no Christian people, there is not a Muslim people. And the Palestinians, in their shrewd evaluation, they found exactly that spot, and in their constitution, in their charter, they said the Jews are not entitled to any land because they are just a religion. And so imagine that. And so we have to overcome this nonsense and say we are a people. With all our diversities, we are a people, and we should insist on the peoplehood, which already embeds the original biblical narrative, because all great civilizations were born from a religious origin. Whether you take the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, and now the Western civilization, all these civilizations came out originally with a religious belief. And this religious belief was adapted and enriched and propagated up to the point where a culture was born out of it, and when the culture flourished and gave its fruit to other neighboring cultures, you become a civilization. And nobody can deny the tremendous impact that the Jewish civilization has had on the world. So, this is the idea, is to rally again along the concept of the Jewish people. And this is exactly what the Zionists did. Theodor Herzl, in 1897, took this notion of Jewish people and he said, we have to have a land of our own. When he was in Paris and he observed the atrocities of the judicial system at the Dreyfus trial, he realized that we have to have a country of our own. And so he insisted on Jewish people. And in 1917, Balfour, Lord Balfour of Britain, took this idea and he said, yes, we recognize that the Jewish people are entitled to have a home and a national home in Palestine, and so that was just some kind of an expression of British foreign policy, but it was very well received by the whole world when he made that statement. A year later, or a few months later, President Wilson in the United States came up with an outstanding notion of self-determination of peoples. That means that anybody who is a people, any group who is a people, and by people I mean somebody who has a common culture, a common tradition, a long history, even a language, and the sense of kinship, they are entitled to self-determine themselves. And this concept of self-determination, introduced by President Wilson in his 14 points in 1918, opened the door for the conference in Paris after World War I, where the Zionist delegation came in and they presented their claims. And their claims was that, in accordance to the biblical narrative, we should reconstitute the same land that we had from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, and some part of the Bismarck, and they drew a map, and it was very well received by the international community. A year later, the Supreme Council of the Allied Powers, who was the ultimate authority in determining who is going to get what after World War I, they met in San Remo, Italy, and in San Remo, they came up with a momentous decision, which is to say that the Jewish people will have the sovereign right to the land that they used to have before, and that land will be put in trust, and Great Britain will be the trustee. And the Jewish people will be the beneficiary of that trust. And all this concept was included 2 years later, in the mandate for Palestine, in which you have, if you read one sentence only of the mandate for Palestine in the third preamble, you will see this. Thereby, a recognition is given to the historical connection of the Jewish people in Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. Imagine the words that were chosen there. Let me repeat first. Recognition is thereby given to the historical connection of the Jewish people to the land called Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that land. And so here we have the center core is the Jewish people. They recognize the historical connection, and the historical connection can only be connected, this history can only be connected to the biblical narrative that Ezra explained before. So we have the historical connection which establishes a link between the religious and the secular facets of the Jewish people. Whether you are religious or you are secular, we are united in sharing a historical connection to the land. And then it is said, and to the grounds of reconstituting their national home. By saying reconstituting and not creating, it means that the Supreme Council of the Allied Powers recognized that we had pre-existing rights. Because if you are reconstituting, is that you had something before that you want to bring about again. And so what is it that we had before? We had before the nation of Israel, which had been sovereign for several centuries, starting with King David and ending up in the Hasmonean dynasty. So it's about for 1,000 years we had several periods of sovereignty, and this is what they wanted to reconstitute their national home. And by calling it a national home, it obviously implied that sooner or later it will become a state, because of the national. You cannot have a national home without becoming a state. And so this is the importance of that sentence, which is embodied in the mandate for Palestine, which is the result of the Salomon Resolution, and it only took about 5 years, really, from the end of World War I to the establishment of all these documents. So, what happened since? When the mandate was issued, Britain was the trustee, the beneficiary were the Jewish people, but unfortunately Britain betrayed the trust that they were obligated to follow. That is another long story, I won't get into that. But in 1948, Ben-Gurion was in Tel Aviv on that Friday night, the 14th of May, and he issued the Declaration of Independence. So here is Ben-Gurion. In the few weeks preceding this Declaration of Independence, there were still some friction between the religious and the non-religious. The religious people wanted to have God mentioned prominently. The secular people said, we don't want to have anything to do with God. And Ben-Gurion had to fight with those two factions in order to bring about some cohesion and some unity. And they found it eventually by writing the Declaration of Independence, which is essentially a secular document. But in this secular document, where you insist about the Jewish people, the value of having the land, the democratic principles that the Jewish people are aspiring to, but also at the same time, he mentioned the Bible as the book of books, he mentioned the prophets of Israel, and he mentioned that the whole authority derives from Tzur Israel. And Tzur Israel, Tzur in Hebrew means the rock. Tzur Israel is one of the many names that is given to God. And that is the concession of concession. That is the way he went in order to satisfy the religious people without creating ruffling too many feathers from the secular. So this is what the Declaration of Independence is, also centered on the Jewish people. And just after the next Israeli elections on March 17, you are going to see a bill that is going to be tabled at the Knesset, and I hope it will pass, as constitutional law of Israel, saying that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. That is exactly the word. They didn't want to say Israel is a Jewish state because, like the Palestinians, some people who say, oh, Jewish state, it is a theocracy, it is like an Islamic state of Iran or Saudi Arabia. He said, no, it is the nation state of the Jewish people. And that's the beauty of it, to center it into the Jewish people, which encompass at the same time the secular aspect and the religious aspect, because it is the long outcome of 3,500 years of history. And as I said before, every civilization originated in the religious beliefs. And so this is where we are now. And I hope that these past 100 years, really, were the most momentous in terms of the Israeli and the Jewish history. You know, in spite of all the vicissitudes and the ups and downs and the Holocaust and so on, we did in these 100 years far more than anything that was done in the past 2000. And so I hope that everybody will find some, will adhere to this rallying cry of the Jewish people, which is central to have unity, and by having unity without calling for uniformity, you can have unity with diversity. But unity is the sine qua non of strength and progress.